Let's see if I can do this without sounding like I'm on my deathbed. Hey, thank you for joining the Escape With Me Book Club. Escape with me, Sam Reiner.
And me, Hannah Rossell.
Into our most recent read. Come with us as we evade reality and go into detail about a new book. We'll be covering the book from beginning to end, so there will be spoilers. Today we're going to Small Village, United Kingdom. Originally a stage play produced in 1930, it was 20 years after Agatha Christie's death that Black Coffee graced the United Kingdom and United States as a novel. Poirot once again finds himself with his friend Hastings solving a murder crime. But can the Queen of Mystery manage a stage play? I would be very interested to see this as a play.
Yeah, me too. I was thinking about that every so often. I'd be like, oh, this would be cool to actually see.
Yeah, even when the book was describing stuff, I viewed it as a stage play. And it made much more sense like that than it would just a book.
Yeah.
But let's do some historical context. Last we heard, her and her husband were getting a divorce because of his affair.
Because he's a piece of trash.
Then the disappearance happened, and then she went to the Isles to get some sun because she probably needed it. So, in April 1928, she's the one, by the way, that's what got me. She files for divorce from her husband, and that becomes official that October, and her ex-husband marries his mistress a week later.
Homegirl was totally planning the wedding while he was still married.
Yeah.
Ugh, not a girl's girl.
So, she ended up getting custody of their child, and she also kept his last name because at this point she was a famous author, so she kept it for her career.
What was her maiden name?
Let me look it up real quick.
The first Google search of the night has begun.
Miller. Her last name was Miller.
Agatha Miller. Interesting. That'd be interesting if that was her name instead of Agatha Christie.
It's got a ring to it.
It does.
You don't meet that many Christies.
Yeah.
I've met a couple Millers, though. Anyway, so they're divorced, and Christie kind of just goes on extended vacations, which is good for her.
Yeah.
Her first time on the Orient Express is in 1928. And while she's on that in Iraq, she makes friends with this couple. He's an archaeologist and she comes with him to all his digs, which sounds really cool. But they invite her out to one of their digs. They're like, hey, at some point in the future, you should totally come out to one of our sites. She thinks, okay, cool. And in fact, she ends up missing the theatrical run of Black Coffee because she goes to one of their digs.
Priorities.
She never saw it in play form. She's never actually seen it on the stage. She just said that she had heard it was good.
Okay.
So this is February 1930 at this point, and she meets a man named Max Mallowen, who is another archaeologist, taking her and her group to the dig site, and they end up getting married that September.
Aw.
So she missed seeing Black Coffee in theaters to meet her second husband, and she will stay married to him for the rest of her life.
Worth it. Totally worth missing the play.
But in her professional life, she has done her second Superintendent Battles book in 1929, and then in 1930, we get the debut of Miss Marple.
Woo!
So there's 3 books in between the last Poirot book and this play. The third one is the first book that she published under that pen name we found out about, Mary Westmacott. And despite the internet saying that she used that to write romance, it's considered a drama, a tragedy.
Huh.
I don't know. I tried to read a summary and it was very confusing.
Oh no.
So I feel like it's one of those books you just have to read it yourself.
Yeah. Add it to the TBR.
But she officially has an alias that is not her name. So why did she write a play? And this is literally considered book 8. The novelization is 8.5 because this is a book. But this is officially book 8 in the Hercule Poirot series. And according to her grandson, he believes that it was created in response to a play that was called Alibi that came out in like 1929. It was an adaptation of her book, Murder of Roger Ackroyd, and she hated it. She was not a fan. She thought it was terrible. And so in response to that, she was like, well, I'm just going to write my own play. And so she ends up writing it. She sends it to her agent, and her agent is like, ugh, no. Burn it, bury it, get it out of here. No one wants this.
Terrible agent.
It was actually a friend of hers who had connections in the theater that read it and was like, no, you should absolutely do this. So it did end up getting getting a theatrical run. Interestingly enough, at the theater that has been doing Mousetrap since like the 50s.
Also a very good play.
So, yeah, that's how we get a stage play out of the Queen of Mystery.
Out of pettiness?
This woman lives on dark chocolate and spite. Absolutely.
I fully support her, because that is also what I live on.
So, background, we didn't know about this one. We knew that she wrote Mousetrap, but we did not know she wrote a Hercule Poirot mystery play. So, this has been a fun little side
quest,
yeah. Why not?
She had a knack for writing plays. I'll say that.
Pretty interesting. So this is totally new to us. Very fun. I've read novelizations of plays before, so I've had experience with that. And like I said, you really do have to read it like it's a stage play for it to make sense. Otherwise, you're like, why are we spending so much time in this study?
Yeah, I had it on Audible and was listening to it. And I just had to imagine it on the stage. If you had zero experience with theater, a very limited experience, you'd be so confused.
Yeah. Even the best novelizations, I feel like you really have to conceptualize it as a play, as it is.
Yeah.
As it should be. But I think it would be harder to find this play versus Mousetrap, which is a shame. But anyway, age level, adult, content warning, less stuff than normal because it's a stage play.
True.
Which he probably could have sensationalized it a little bit more, but it seems he stuck really close to the script.
Yeah.
So all we have is racism toward Italians because Italians aren't white people yet, murder, and language PG-13.
Yeah.
Judge a book by its cover. I have questions. The one I had was a black cover with orange writing black coffee, but it had a crow on it or a raven.
What?
Yeah, I don't know why. I honestly do not know why it had a crow or a raven on it. That doesn't even come up once.
What in the world?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes no sense. That is baffling.
Yeah.
I have questions.
And then the one on Goodreads is Poirot drinking coffee.
He doesn't even drink coffee in this play.
And he doesn't even drink coffee. And then yours, okay.
Mine makes more sense. Audible had it right.
A little more sense. Yeah, you have a formula in the back of some sort, chemistry formula, and then you have a coffee spill that spells black, and then coffee is a stamp. That is probably the best of the three covers we have right now.
Yeah, definitely.
So what am I supposed to do with that? It's a black book with a crow on it.
The crow was certainly a choice.
I don't know.
I really wonder if the people who make these covers have actually ever listened or read the book, or if they just make a cover that looks cool.
That one didn't. I have questions. Anyway, so I ended up just going with the title and running with it. So Black Coffee. And so I thought, oh, maybe Poirot goes to South America to see Hastings there, and he goes to a country with coffee.
Ah, I can see that.
Coffee beans, because they talk about South America enough.
Yeah.
That does not end up happening.
But he hates boats. He hates sailing.
He gets very seasick, yes. But he was willing to do it in the Big Four.
That is true.
So that's all I had to run with this.
Yeah.
Do they even have crows and ravens in South America? I feel like that's one of the things every continent has.
That's a great question. I guess it depends on where.
Okay, so there's some in like the South Mountains, which isn't where coffee is farmed, so.
If Poirot was going to South America, wouldn't he go to Argentina where Hastings lives? So I think Hastings is in Argentina.
Maybe he made a trip around. I don't know.
My book cover made it very obvious. More obvious than that.
Yes.
Coffee, science, a stamp. I don't know where the stamp came from. That was a little funky.
Business stuff.
It's like one of those confidential stamps.
But coffee, yeah. So yeah, stage play.
This one was funky. I don't know how yours was. Did you read it or listen to it?
I read it.
Okay. I don't know how it was split up in the printed version, but listening to it, they didn't say the chapters. It was just all of a sudden I'd look on Audible and I'd be like, oh, we're on chapter like 13 now. Last time I looked, it was chapter 7.
Yeah, the chapters were pretty short.
It was just funny because I'm usually in the like chapter 7, and they just didn't say that. And it threw me off a little bit, but it was fine.
So, as you do, Poirot is having lunch one day when he gets news from a random guy needing his help.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Poirot looks him up, decides he's worth his time. Apparently, he has created this really cool formula for a new explosive, and someone in his house is trying to steal it. he needs Poirot to take it to the government.
All very normal.
I don't know why Poirot specifically has to do that. Like, why can't you get off your own butt and do that? But whatever. That is the setup here. Oh, and by the way, guess who just happens to be in town? Hastings. Which Hastings is only in this place to have someone for Poirot to soliloquy at.
Yeah, it's so unfortunate that it had to be him.
Like, he's so useless, they get rid of him basically in the third act by pairing him off with this random woman and being like, he totally doesn't have a wife.
Yes, every time I was like, Hastings, you're married.
I know there was one point where he's like, oh my gosh, I've never known anyone like you. And I was like, your wife literally climbed a house to stop a murderer.
Yes.
She is so much better than you. She cursed in front of you and you freaked out. Yes, you have met someone like that.
His wife deserves so much better.
I think because it's a play, they just purposely left it out.
Yeah, because I guess you're a typical person who wouldn't have the background knowledge.
No, it's like you just walk in, you're like, oh, Hastings, Pro. But there are specific things, like they bring up, oh, our last case together was the Big Four. They kind of leave out the mystery of the Blue Train, but the Blue Train did happen before this one, canonically, so.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we switch over to the Amory household, which will stay there for the rest of the play. And he's like, hey, everybody, we're over dinner. I'm having a guest come soon. Let's set up the family a little bit. We have Claude, which I'm going to have to call them all by their first names because they're all Amorys.
Yes.
Except for the one secretary and the Italian guy.
And the butler. But he doesn't really show up. Claude
is the patriarch of the family here. He's a rich, famous scientist and whatnot. He has a son named Richard, and Richard has a wife named Lucia.
Yes.
He met in Italy. They got married really soon after that. Then Claude has a niece named Barbara and a sister named Caroline.
Yes.
So that's the family of Amorys here. Then we have Dr. Corelli, who is this Italian doctor that seems to know Lucia somehow, even though Lucia hates him with a burning passion she does not hide. And then we have Edward Renoir as Claude's secretary. And then we have Treadwell the butler, whose only purpose is to lock the door. Woo!
Once again, I say Treadwell was my favorite. I don't know.
The least amount of screen time.
Yes.
Stage time?
Yes.
There we go. So anyway, Lucia runs to this study, which I sent you a picture of because there is a layout in the book, which makes sense. There would be a layout for the play.
That was so helpful.
It's a lot of furniture in this room at weird places in intervals. I wouldn't have designed a room like that, but it's for the stage.
Yeah.
Basing on a stage when you're viewing it from below the stage is very different than actually being in the room.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's a little weird, but if you remember it's a play, it's fine. So Lucia comes into the study claiming she has a light head, and Carolyn is kind of a busybody, but like also this girl just said she's about to faint. I don't blame her for being concerned. But Lucia kind of goes on this rant about how she actually hates Italy and she doesn't want to talk about her mother. And I put absent/dead because that was the vibe I was getting from it. She's like, I don't want to talk about Italy and I don't want to talk about mother. Then Carolyn is like, well, you know, your friend here, Dr. Corelli. And she's like, he's not my friend. No one was ever kind to me in Italy. It was like, oh my goodness.
She had a lot of dislike for Italy.
She's got some trauma. But immediately at this point, when she's like, he's not my friend, I was like, oh, so he's blackmailing you.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Yeah, it was like something sus with this guy.
Yeah, and especially later on, Richard comes in and confronts her and is like, hey, he passed you a note during dinner, so obviously you're having an affair, bruh.
Because that's a logical conclusion, yes.
You got some trust issues? It'd be one thing to be like, hey, you were passing notes. What was that about? That's weird. Then to just like straight up be like, you're having an affair. Run away. Okay.
Yeah. Lots of jumping to conclusions.
Yeah. Random throw in that Richard gave up his military career to live with Claude because Claude was like, no, don't do that. Live in my house. And Richard was like, well, now I have to do that. Okay, I don't know. Maybe he was threatening his inheritance, but that was a little of a non sequitur to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, Barbara and Carolyn come in and Richard leaves because he is having a hissy fit. And Barbara and Carolyn kind of shoot the breeze about kids these days. And so it's like Carolyn representing the older generation and Barbara representing the younger generation. And it's kind of ironic that Agatha would become a Carolyn by the end of her career completely.
Yes.
It was just a fun stereotype on, oh, kids these days, when it's actually like, no, it's just the older generation versus the younger generation. Which generation? All of them.
Yes. And that happens a lot in her books, I feel like.
When they're young, they're Barbara. When they're old, they're Carolyn. It doesn't matter which generation. That's every single one goes through the passage of time.
Yep.
So they decide Lucia needs something medical. And oh, wouldn't you know it? Barbara's sister just so happened to work in a dispensary and she lives in India now, but she left all her stuff behind.
How convenient.
And it's right on top of this bookshelf. Not even in the attic.
Just casual drugs.
Casual drug storage.
As one does.
Anyway, there's a bunch of poisons in there. Absolutely.
It's the early 1900s.
We weren't quite taking nightshade to make our pupils look bigger, but still some very casual poison taking. Anyway, so they kind of talk about the poisons, and then Corelli comes in and talks about the poisons and is like, hey, these two cause horribly painful deaths, but this one lets you fall asleep and just have a nice little sleep, and then you die. Oh, and by the way, there's enough in here to poison like 12 men.
Yeah, convenient. Just gonna drop that out. Put that out there. Goodness gracious.
Yeah. So Richard comes back in. Treadwell shows up with coffee. Claude and his secretary are in his study, which is adjacent to the room. I kept really meticulous notes about who gave who cups. I didn't need to, but you know, is it Agatha Christie? You never know.
Yeah.
Because the first thing that happens is Corelli gives Carolyn a cup, and I was like, okay, does she die or does Corelli die? Neither. Edward walks in and sees Lucia take a bunch of the sleepy poison and put it in her hand.
Yeah.
And he promptly forgets that till like the end of the play. Oh my goodness.
Does he forget it, or does he just put it in his back pocket to use for later?
I think he could have more masterfully used it sooner. I legitimately wonder if he forgot.
Yeah. Or if Agatha forgot.
No, Agatha never forgets.
Fair enough.
So anyway, he grabs a cup of coffee and she's like, no, not that one, this one. And then you're like, okay, I wish I could see the stage play so I could know which one she poisoned.
Yeah.
So here's where we give the game away. And I don't know if I would have included it in the stage play. Maybe have him, I don't know, step aside and wait for a moment or something. But the book specifically says he puts something into the cup of coffee. So you've kind of narrowed yourself to one of two people.
Yeah.
And most likely the person that last had the cup.
Yeah, I will say this was probably her simplest mystery.
And it would have to be for a stage play. But it was that one throwaway line where I was like, okay, so we know who the murderer is very early. So that was -1 star for me. Because he's not like, oh, he takes a sleeping pill, whatever. But here's my real question. How fast do these pills dissolve?
Yeah, that is a good question.
She has a handful of them that she puts in her, you end up finding out, her own coffee.
Was there just sludge at the bottom?
And then Edward puts it into his coffee right before he gives it to him.
And speaking from experience, not that I've tried to poison myself with coffee, but in high school, I accidentally dropped one of my antibiotic pills in my coffee. And I was like, oh, it's fine, I'll drink it. It was not fine.
Yeah.
It tasted terrible.
He mentions that the coffee tastes bitter, and I'm going to say coffee is pretty accurate.
But I mean, nothing can cover the taste of a pill getting dropped into your coffee. It's disgusting.
That early.
Not even like more sugar and creamer. There's no hope. It's just nasty.
I just have questions on how quickly these things dissolve. Anyway, Claude comes out, puts some sugar in his coffee and whatever. Maybe that's why he didn't suspect a powder. I don't know. It would still have to dissolve so quickly to become part of the sugar. Anyway, not the point. He comes out and he's like, hey, I know one of you stole my formula. I have a friend coming, a detective detective and he's going to tell us which one did it, but we're going to turn out the power for 1 minute. And if the formula just so happens to appear on the table next to me by the time the minute is up, I'll totally forget about everything. Send him away. It'll be fine.
He's a lot nicer than most people would be about that.
It's so stupid. Because if it's Corelli, you want to cast him out of your house immediately. If it's a member of your family, who's going to stop them from doing it again?
Right?
I don't know.
Book smart, not street smart.
It's the British sensibilities for me sometimes. Like, later on, Richard's like, I would rather my uncle's murderer go free than cause a scandal. Granted, that was his excuse. He thought his wife did it and was trying to cover that up. But the fact that the police weren't like, so you did it immediately. It was just, I cannot.
Yeah.
Ugh. So the only people that didn't enter the room with the safe are Carolyn and Barbara, which immediately in my mind was like, that doesn't mean they didn't help.
Yes.
They just had an accomplice, so it couldn't be them by themselves.
And at one point, Barbara's like, no, but you're wrong. What if I did it or something?
Barbara is a chaos goblin.
Truly.
And only there to help pad the screen time sometimes, I swear.
Yeah. She was a fun character, though.
I would hate knowing her in real life.
Oh, absolutely. But she fit well into this.
Somebody's gotta be talking bad about the dead person.
Saying everything that people are too scared to say.
Yeah. Oh, that's what it was. Someone was like, oh, Barbara and Carolyn never went in there. But Barbara was like, no, you have to suspect me too. Because Carolyn sent me in there to look for her knitting needle. This woman is terrible about her knitting needles. Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Twice in the span of not even 24 hours.
Yeah, I'm like, how many times have you accidentally sat on your knitting needle?
She would have to move them all from one needle to the next and then lose the knitting needle. Or is she just not making any progress and she just keeps losing the same knitting? I can't. She's very bad at this.
She is.
That aside, there's a bunch of noise that happens when the light goes out. Goodness, Lucy is a little bit of a...
Dramatic.
She's very overly dramatic. She seems like a lovely person, just in a terrible situation, but girl, calm down. My favorite thing, of course, was a little bit Barbara in this moment. When the lights go out, everyone's like, oh my gosh. And Carolyn starts talking. She's like, really now? This is whatever. And Barbara's like, shut up. I'm trying to listen.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, okay, there she's saying what all of us are thinking, but still. So there's the sound of some sort of metallic thing, and then there's the sound of silk ripping, and then Lucia starts screaming that she needs light, and there's a knock on the door? I don't know what that was. I don't know if that's ever explained.
I thought it was Treadwell knocking at the door. That's just what I assumed it to be.
Why? Why would he knock on the door?
I thought it was maybe him trying to knock to be like, hey, Poirot's here or something.
Because that doesn't happen till...
Although no, because he was the one that cut the power.
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay, never mind. It's a ghost.
No clue.
It's a ghost.
I think Richard was by the door. Maybe he was knocking on the door to get out.
Maybe.
I don't know. That one's not really explained. But the lights come back on and hey, guess what? There's a packet next to him. Woo! Yay!
Woohoo!
And so Poirot shows up at this point and Richard is trying to turn him away and being like, oh, it's all good. It's all good. We, like, the formula's there and whatever. Richard, you haven't suspected your wife of murder yet. I don't know. Anyway, the point is Poirot shows up to basically announce that Claude is dead. And it's a locked room mystery because the door was locked from the outside and the French window was locked by a key that only Claude has. So, yay, locked room mystery.
Yeah. Did no one think it was weird that he
just fell asleep in his chair?
After drinking coffee, no one was like, huh.
He's like, it's bitter, and he falls asleep. I'm like, that is the biggest sign of poisoning I have ever heard.
Did he just have a habit of falling asleep places? What is going on?
Yeah, no, it's a little weird that he just fell asleep in his chair.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But anyway, Bro's here now.
Woo, in Hastings.
Oh my goodness. So Lucia immediately begs him to solve the murder. And Richard's like the exact opposite. He wants to send Poirot away. He doesn't want a scandal and whatever. And so Poirot's like, well, we might as well have the doctor show up.
Someone's died.
Yeah. So Claude was like, oh, you can't leave this room until we figure this out. And so Poirot's like, no, suspects, go about the house. And basically, so he and Hastings can be alone in the room so Poirot can investigate.
Yes.
It makes so much more sense as a stage play if you consider the fact that we can't really leave this room. I'm completely imagining just this room.
Yeah.
Is the entirety. Honestly, you could skip the first Poirot part and just start with Claude explaining stuff. So we could literally just have this room the entire play.
Yeah, it could.
We may never know. We'd have to get hands on the stage play. So he finds a key under Edward's overturned chair and he realizes it's a cheap duplicate of the safe key. So that's suspicious. Treadwell shows up for exposition dumps. Lucia doesn't like Corelli. And also Lucia left her purse in the room before leaving.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh my gosh, this woman. Poirot gets them to leave the room. Poirot's in the study or something. And Lucia comes in to get the teacup, but Poirot catches her in the act. She's like, oh, I'm just getting my handbag. Then she leaves. And so Poirot's like, well, that's suspicious. And so takes a sample of the coffee cup because wouldn't you know it, 10 minutes later, if that, she comes back in. My only thought is this is the point where she thought that her husband did it.
Oh, maybe.
Because she pours out the coffee and puts it in a vase or a house plant or something that's in the corner. It's a plant.
That poor plant.
A little bit. But that's my only reason I can think for her destroying the evidence in the most suspicious way possible. That's how I knew it wasn't Lucia. Because this whole book made her look so suspicious.
It did. Yes.
It was so bad. Anyway, the physician shows up and it's like, and it's murdered. He's been poisoned. This isn't a heart attack. He was healthy 2 weeks ago.
Shocking.
So we're going to start an inquest and have an autopsy done. And Richard's like, but scandal. Bruh, you have a poisoner in your house. Once again, I think he thinks it's Lucia who did it, which both of y'all, real good trust. You're totally fine with the concept that the other might have murdered a dear family member. Well, not that dear, but a family member. Anyway, the next day, Poirot gets up early, goes to the village, gotta get that sample taken care of. So he comes back and basically bags on Hastings, because would this be a Hastings appearance if Poirot didn't call him stupid at least 8 different ways?
Yeah.
So they start interviewing the suspects. Richard gives the most bare bones explanation. And he's just like, hey, you should leave. And Poirot's like, cool, but I won't.
No, I will not do that.
So he leaves and Poirot's like, but the formula is still in this room because where the heck else could they stash it? Except, did they lock the library? They call it a library. It has like a bookcase.
It's a very small library.
Did they lock it? Because I would be concerned that someone tried to take it in the night, you know? Yeah. If they have a cheap copy of the safe key, why don't they have a cheap copy of that room key just in case? I don't know. Anyway, the point is, Lucia shows back up to be the most suspicious, and she goes for the tin with the poisons and brings attention to it. Thanks, Lucia. So they point out at this point, oh, the box doesn't have dust on it. I was like, oh, so Edward went ahead and got the medicine.
Yeah. He's helping out a lot. He's been very helpful.
I don't know. I solved this one maybe a little too quick because it was like, okay, Edward did the poisoning. Oh, there's no dust on it. Oh, so he got it down before they got it down. Anyway, yes, that's what happened. But Lucia decides to beg Poirot to leave at this point.
Yeah, changed gears real fast.
Except Dr. Graham shows up and is like, hey, he was poisoned, and it is the sleepy poison. And Poirot lets the doctor take the false coffee cup that Lucia planted the night before.
Yeah, which is weird.
That's never really explained. He just has a gotcha moment with Lucia later on where he's like, yeah, I know what you did. I got a sample.
Yeah.
Anyway, he returns the tin to the top of the bookcase, and the top of the bookcase is dusty, so confirmed.
I know. It was just so funny because Poirot was like, those housekeepers are so nice. And he puts it back up and he goes, oh no.
No, they did not.
Just kidding.
And Hastings said that a detective and a housemaid aren't the same thing. And then that stuck with Hercule's soul.
Yeah.
He was like, but it is the same thing.
Yes.
Okay. he does that twice after this. So Poirot summons Corelli, talks to him. Corelli's like, oh, I have to leave for London. I have important business. And Poirot's like, cool, there's a murder. You're not going anywhere.
Once again, no.
And he's like, oh, and by the way, blackmail. And Corelli's like, what?
Me? Never.
Okay, so yeah, you've been blackmailing Lucia. Knew it. She talks to Carolyn, and Carolyn just basically goes on this tangent about how Lucia's diamond necklace was stolen 2 months back, and that Richard was quarreling with Claude about money. And oh, by the way, they only met last November and married in a week. And also, she's an orphan with no family.
Yeah.
This Carolyn and the Carolyn and Roger Ackroyd are related. The most gossipy gossips who have ever gossiped.
Oh, definitely. Immediately they're like, oh yeah, her diamond necklace went missing. I was like, oh, she sold it.
Yes.
Because she didn't want the police involved.
Yeah, this was a little too easy, but I'm wondering if she wanted to make it simple for the sake of it being a stage play. But maybe that's what the agent read. She's like, no, you're the queen of twist and mystery. This one's too obvious. Don't do it. And then someone who was actually stage was like, no, this is the perfect amount of basic for a stage play. It's good.
Yes.
That is two different writing styles, but we will never know.
Yeah.
So Poirot, he makes her, specifically her, no one else, makes her close her eyes and try to remember the sounds. And it was a little bit funny because he's like, oh, but did you hear this sound? And he throws the key on the ground and it doesn't make a noise. And she's like, am I supposed to hear something? And he's like, yes. Did it sound like this? And so he throws it on the coffee table and it actually makes a ding. And she's like, oh my gosh, yes. And then she also claims she heard a dress ripping and thinks it's Lucia because she was sitting next to Barbara. You didn't check? I mean, granted, a lot happened, but I feel like you would notice Lucia's dress is ripped.
Yeah, especially if it ripped to the extent where, like, you hear it. That'd be, like, a pretty big rip, right?
You end up finding out it was him tearing up a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Fancy paper, first of all. But it's a piece of paper. That required a lot of tearing.
Yeah. You hear it once, and you're like, oh, just one rip. No, there'd have to be multiple rips in this dress.
Rip, 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 rip. Rip. She would have a chunk. I could imagine it happening because she is having a bit of a panic attack, but you would notice.
Yeah, and unless the ripping started and then Lucia started yelling and that hid the sound.
I don't know. Anyway, it's Edward's turn. He claims to not recognize the duplicate safe key, which I thought was kind of obvious. So here's where I was. Edward absolutely killed Claude, but did he steal the formula? Because that could have been said, like, these are two different crimes. You can't automatically lump one with the other, especially in a Christie book. So I was totally sold that he was the murderer, but at this point I was not sold that he had the fake safe key. And it seems kind of obvious because you had to throw it on the coffee table. If he had stood up, because his chair was overturned, if he had stood up suddenly and it fell out of his pocket, it wouldn't have made a noise.
Yeah.
So this was where I was like, okay, Corelli is the one with the formula right now. He's trying to leave. He's trying to get out of there. He makes a suspicious phone call. Long distance, by the way, so that's great on the budget, but whatever, they're rich people. And he's just the most suspicious, which granted, maybe I should have been a little bit more skeptical about, but he is definitely involved in it.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, he also brings up that Claude got a note warning him about Selma Gotez and her brood.
Goots.
Goots?
Yeah, that's how they said it in the recording. Goots.
Who just happens to be the most international spy that's ever spied.
Yeah, just mysteriously died.
And Edward's like, oh, clearly her daughter is the Italian maid that Lucia brought up that we have never brought up previously and will never bring up ever again, really.
Was I crazy for being like, oh yeah, it's Lucia?
No, that's what I thought immediately.
Yes.
Okay, I was like, okay. He's like, oh, it's the Italian maid. I'm like, it's Lucia.
Yeah.
The woman that hates Italy and doesn't want to talk about her mom? Y'all. What you must think of the average IQ of a playgoer, I guess. I have no idea. I would need to see it on stage to accurately be like, are you just messing with me right now? But as it goes, Poirot sends Hastings out into the garden so he can talk to Lucia. So we get a 2 for one scene. He overhears Barbara being nonchalant about the death. And oh, by the way, I don't like that Barbara's supposed to be sweet on the physician, but I think they broke up.
Oh, yeah.
In that scene.
I was not getting, oh, I totally have a crush on you vibes. No.
Because he was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry your uncle's been murdered. And she's like, I don't care. And he's like, he was poisoned, Barbara. And she's like, ugh, I hate this topic, and walks off.
Yeah.
And then she starts actively chasing Hastings.
Her little pet. I was like, homegirl broke up with him.
A little bit, and he's better for it.
Yeah.
What sort of, just a little bit of a psychopath. Just a little bit.
A little bit.
Not concerned that he got murdered, not concerned it was someone in the household, not concerned that she could be or someone else could still be in danger. She's just out to get a new beau.
Yeah. She has her priorities.
I think he's better off.
Yeah, he deserves better for sure.
Which I wonder how they do it in the play, if they have a little either off stage or like a little corner of the stage gets turned into the garden, maybe?
Oh, maybe, because he does go out the French windows.
Yeah.
So if you had it set up, you could just have it right outside the French windows sort of deal.
Yeah, in that stage way where it's like, oh, it's right next to the door, but you understand that it's a distance.
Yeah.
Or does he come back into the room and tell Poirot, but because it's a novelization, instead of doing that, he has you see Hastings listening.
Oh, I mean, it could really be any of that, truly.
So curious, but Poirot is like, "Hey, Lucia, you need to trust Papa Poirot."
I love that he calls himself that. Every time it comes up in a book, he's like, Papa Poirot. And I'm like, I love that. He just calls himself that unashamed. I love it.
I do love it as a character trait, but if this was my boss, I would be so tired.
That's why it works though, because it's with different people every time. So no one's like, you've called yourself that for months now. Please stop.
I cannot imagine someone saying that in real life.
No. It works for Poirot.
But he does it every single... You need to trust Papa Poirot. And sometimes I think he relates himself to a priest, too. Maybe not in this one. Maybe it was in another one. But still, my goodness. But he's like, hey, I know you're Selma's daughter. And she tries all sorts of this way and that way to be like, oh, no, it's this other girl. I was never there. Da-da-da-da-da. And Poirot's like, actually, I have a photo of you and her, and so clearly you're her daughter. And he's like, oh no, you've mistaken me.
Went on walks with her.
I went on walks with her. Her daughter was somebody else. And he's like, I thought you've never been there before. And she admits it. And she's like, there was no photo. And he was like, no, there was no photo. And I was like, that would have been really contrived in the 1930s. Oh, I just happened to know a society writer 10 years ago that took this picture that I vividly remember.
Yes.
I mean, Poirot could do it, but come on.
I think she was so frazzled by everything, too, that it worked a little bit better.
Yeah. So, confirmed, she's being blackmailed. She sold off her necklace. She meant to take the formula, but she didn't end up with it. And Corelli's the one who made the safe key duplicate, for sure. When the lights went off, she threw the key, and so that's how it got under Edward's chair. And then she hid the note that Corelli gave her at lunch in the book right in front of her where she was sitting. And so Poirot has her take it out, and she's about to hand it to him, and he's like, no, it's between you and whatever. And I was like, well, darn.
I wanted to know what it said.
I want to know what it said. I honestly expected it to be so do it tonight or else, you know, like something super simple. I wasn't really thinking, oh, this could be like an intimate document somehow, but maybe it was just to be like, oh, I trust you, so you should trust me kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because it probably wasn't anything important.
Yeah, maybe.
So she ended up slipping the pills in her own drink before her secret got out, because Richard's already mad at her, thinking she's having an affair. And she was like, well, once they find out that I'm Selma's daughter, they're going to cast me out. My world's going to be terrible, yada, yada.
So let me just kill myself. Yeah, that's the answer.
She's very dramatic.
Yes.
But Richard came in and he was like, you know what? Because she was like, please, let's go away. The shadows of this house, blah, 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 blah. And he was like, you know what? Yeah, let's go away. And so she decided not to kill herself.
Never mind. I don't actually want to die.
And then there's this whole weird thing where he's like, oh, I have the sample. Is it going to show the poison or not? And she's like, it will, because I am the murderer. And he's like, okay, you're not the murderer, but okay.
Yeah, okay.
At this point, Inspector Japp shows up.
Little late to the party there.
What is this man's jurisdiction?
Everything.
He's Scotland Yard, and Scotland Yard is very specifically London. And granted, they call on Scotland Yard all across the country because they're the best and whatever. And they explain later in the book, they were like, oh, he just happened to be in town. But I'm like, even if that's true, wouldn't someone else be with, like a local cop be with? Anyway, contrived excuse to have Japp is contrived. But we have Japp.
He should have been here the whole time instead of Hastings, truly.
Honestly, I think it would have worked better. But then we have to have Hastings leaving the room like an idiot.
Yeah, every time. I shouldn't leave the room. Oh, how will he know? I shouldn't leave the room. How will he know? I shouldn't leave the room. How do you know? You're right. How would he know?
Because you're not in the room.
Let me just leave and miss all of this important stuff that goes down.
I can't.
Hastings, you've done this before. Did you not learn your lesson the first time?
With your wife.
You're married, bro.
You're married, but you did this exact same thing with your wife in looking at dead body and important evidence going missing. He's so dumb. She's not even a redhead.
Yeah, it's not even his type.
Ugh, I can't. Anyway, contrived excuse to get Hastings out of the room is contrived, so the room can be empty so Carolyn can come in and be the most suspicious, looking for her dang knitting needle.
Yeah, I was like, you just have to make her sound as suspicious as possible doing this.
And then another kind of funny part is Corelli's like, oh, you're in here. Can I use the phone? And she's like, sure. And then she just keeps talking to him.
And knitting.
And anyway, he finally gets her out of the room to make calls, like the most suspicious call. It's so bad. And then Edward walks in and goes straight to the fireplace. And Corelli walks out. He's like, oh, could you not be in here? Because the phone's ringing back. Because he called the number. He's like, hey, call me back. And then he's waiting. Edward shows up. He walks in the room and the phone rings. He's like, oh, would you mind leaving? And Edward's like, oh, yeah, sure, man. Leaves. I don't know. It's really weird to me.
I can just imagine just seeing him getting more and more frustrated.
Depending how it's acted, it could be very funny.
Very good comic relief.
He's about to leave the house. He's about to go. He's made this phone call and he's about to leave. But Poirot and Jap thankfully show up because Hastings wasn't doing his job. And yeah, it's a guy named Tonio. What is the most stereotypical Italian name we could give this man?
Tonio, of course.
Anyway, Jap is like, well, everyone needs to come to the library because it would not be a Poirot book if we did not all gather in the library.
We gotta do it.
So everyone's gathered, and this is when Edward's like, oh yeah, Lucia, you grabbed a bunch of pills, didn't you?
Convenient time to bring it up.
Yeah, and then Corelli's like, oh, clearly this was all Lucia. So he claims his parts in the crime that the police already know. He's like, oh, I'm going to go down for that. But I'm not going to go down for this murder. This is all her fault. So she tells the truth about it, who her mother is and whatever. And Richard's like, I needed to talk to the inspector. And so everyone leaves the library again because play. Also, Poirot gives Hastings a hard time, but not nearly a hard enough time. But everyone, Hastings and Barbara go back into the garden. A couple people leave through this room and whatever. I could see it happening as a stage play. But yeah, they all leave the room because we can't have Richard and Jap leave the room because then we would need another room set up.
Yes.
So everyone else has to leave.
Yeah.
So he tries to claim he's the murderer, but Jap is immediately like, you're covering for your wife. And okay, Poirot instructs Richard to go get a room at the hotel immediately?
Yeah.
And give the house over to the police?
Yeah, and it's like, weren't you just telling people they couldn't leave?
But why though? Because we're literally about to solve the murder.
I had questions about that decision.
Normally Poirot does things for a reason.
I really feel like it was just to add some length to the play.
Time doesn't even pass. It's not even the next day. They're literally about to solve the murder in an hour.
Yeah.
I don't know. That didn't end up paying off. I'm very confused. So Poirot obviously thinks Claude's death was planned in advance. And so that means he would not be prepared for the fact that Claude knows that the thief took the thing. Because the thief thinks, oh, I'm going to totally get away with it. What are the chances that he's going to look in his safe a second time? That's so unlike him. And oh, instead of tearing dress material, he's like, oh, tearing silk. And so I thought someone had torn the chair they were sitting in and put it under there.
Oh.
And so I was looking back around to Carolyn looking in her chair for the knitting needle, but it's immediately solved as the vase of spills. So the vase of spills is essentially a vase filled with things you want to burn in the fireplace. So like papers, lint, anything like that. Basically, specifically something to hold things I'm going to put on the fire to help it burn. That's what a vase of spills is. So inside the vase of spills, they find torn up pieces of paper. And immediately when they were like, oh, it's the vase of spills, I was like, okay, so we're back to Edward. He did have the formula because this dude has been by the fireplace every second he can.
So much.
That is his place. he just keeps going to it. And so Edward appears being like, hey, Jap wants to talk to you. And Poirot gives a note to Hastings to give to Jap.
I just, knowing how much information had to be in that note, how long was he writing it? Was he just standing there not talking to Edward, just writing for like minutes?
I don't know. A part of me wondered if he just wrote something like, go to the French window and listen. I feel like that's all the instruction you would really need.
Yeah, but then Hastings having backup and everything.
That's true. I don't know. Maybe he has a code.
Maybe
he writes in abbreviations.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
No idea. But this scene, Poirot is going to confront Edward by himself to be like, hey, you're suspicious. But Edward is like, oh, let me get us some whiskeys. Because Poirot's like, oh, it's kind of hot. So he's like, oh, well, let me get us some whiskeys. He goes out of the room and comes back with them. And Poirot is like, oh, of course. Oh, but wait, the door is knocking. And so he walks over to the door, and this is what you're talking about. He walks over to the door and he's like, oh, I guess no one's out here, and walks back in and starts drinking his whiskey. And so I was like, immediately, I was like, so he either didn't drink it or somehow switched the glasses.
Yeah.
So he's like, oh no, it's so bitter and whatever. And he starts to act like he's falling asleep. But he calls out Edward, and Edward just admits everything because he thinks Poirot's dying. Except he was pretending. And guess what? Jap was listening from the French windows. So he naps him after the confession, and we're done.
Yes. And Edward really thinks he's dead, tries to leave, turns back around, Poirot's just like up, and he's like, what? Huh?
No, he's walking out the door and Poirot says something.
Oh, that's right. And then he turns around.
Which that was a better reveal in book form than it would have been on the play. Maybe. I don't know. It depends how it's done. But that was pretty good. But did Richard have time to even go to the hotel?
No, probably not.
Why? Why does he have to go to a hotel?
I truly have no idea.
Anyway, something we slipped over for a second. It really ends with Poirot being like, hey, Lucia, you thought Richard did it, and you were covering for him. And Richard, you thought Lucia did it, and were covering for it. So clearly, you are in love.
You were just, wanting to cover. It went from their marriages in shambles to they're happy again.
Because murder.
Yeah, who knew murder could save a marriage?
And now he probably gets the inheritance, so their money woes are over, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
The debts Richard has or whatever. How do you, I am fascinated.
I don't know how you get debts living at home, but yeah.
What are your debts? Do you just drink at the bar a lot? Do you have a tab? Do you buy fancy clothes on account for your wife? What is the economic system?
Yeah.
It's probably the same as it is for real rich people, but anyway. General thoughts. I think it'll be better as a play. It was meant as a play. I think that's how it should be.
I was constantly imagining, like I said earlier, what it would look like in play form.
I feel like the book stuck really closely to the stage play, and the foreword was written by the grandson of Agatha Christie, giving his stamp on it.
Oh.
And I don't think he would have done that if it was radically different than the stage play.
Yeah, for sure.
But to make this a true Agatha Christie book, I think you would have had to change some stuff. Because this was very obviously a stage play that has been novelized.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where you hit the line of how faithful do you stay to it versus how book you want to make it.
Yeah.
One question for the author. Why Hastings? Why? You keep bringing him back.
He's married. Let him rest, please.
He's a wet blanket. That all his purpose is to have someone to soliloquy at. Like you said, you could have had Jap.
Literally anybody else. Anybody.
I guess.
Like freaking the butler.
Treadwell.
Could have been Treadwell. Give that man some more time on stage.
Goodness.
Well, I had two questions, so I had a feeling you'd probably answer the first one. And the first one was, why a play? You already answered that. So I have my backup question, because I knew you would probably go over it in the history of the book. Did she enjoy writing this more or less than a book, or was it about equal?
I don't know. I thoroughly believe it was spite, and then she was like, I don't care what happens to this now. Because literally, she went on an archaeological dig instead of seeing it in plays, and the most she's ever said about it is, I heard it was good. That's all I need.
Yeah, but then she also had Mousetrap, so I was like, she had to like it enough to write two of them.
Yeah, but only 2 out of how many books?
That's true. She didn't hate it to only do 1. She was okay with it.
It was okay enough, but she's also not out here writing a bunch of plays either. I think if she loved it, we would have like 10.
Yeah, I can imagine a play is very labor intensive having to write it.
It's very different.
Like, you had to just include so many more details and everything.
The way the audience interacts with a play is different than the way an audience interacts with a book. Because it's like writing a movie. Writing a movie is very different because all you have in a movie is visuals. So all you have in a play is visuals. You don't get like that descriptive. So I've heard books described as an audio experience versus a visual experience.
Okay, that makes sense.
That's why audiobooks work.
That's very true. I wasn't sure if there's more than like Mousetrap and I just didn't know about them.
Maybe. We didn't know about this one. So maybe we will be surprised.
That is true. There's a secret third pen name.
I feel like every time she goes out of her way to be involved in something, it's because she hated that someone else did it badly.
Yes.
Like, her complaining about her movies is very funny.
Yeah.
She's like, this is bad. I'm surprised she did. Maybe she wrote her own movie. I don't know. We'll find out.
I guess we will.
But yeah, I thoroughly believe this was written out of spite.
Yeah.
100%. Rating. I would give it that first sip of a hot drink out of 10.
Oh, that's a good one.
A little too hot, so it's not quite ready. But, I mean, it still tastes like the thing. Hopefully it's not so bad that you burned yourself, but it's not quite ready, is the vibe I kind of got from it. It's like, it's not quite Agatha Christie level. So I'm not going to belabor that the agent told her that it was trash, especially if it was a literary agent. From a book perspective, it's kind of lame, but I think from a play's perspective, it would be different.
Yeah, and if you're used to the work she normally does in books, reading something like this is probably like,
You figure it out immediately.
Yeah. I said a stealthy switch out of 10, going back to the handing off the drink in the book, but also the transitioning from the stage play to the book. There's probably some switches they made, but they were so well done.
Yeah.
Or behind the scenes that we as the readers probably wouldn't notice that much. Not as in-depth as yours, but, you know.
Read again. Probably not.
Oh, I always said yes. Only if I could read the actual stage play version of it, though.
Yeah.
And not the book adaptation.
Okay, I can see that.
So yes, but yes with a caveat.
I wouldn't go out of my way. Like, if I found out, oh, New York, it has the play on some off-Broadway whatever revival, I wouldn't be like, oh, I need to go to New York to see it. But if it passed through town...
I'd probably go see it.
Which it never will, but if it passed through town, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, if, like, our community theater put it on, I'd probably go see it.
Yeah, like if it was near me, like within an hour, I think.
Yeah, sounds right.
But yeah, I don't see any need to read the book again. It's Edward. It's really obvious it's Edward from the beginning. Here we be.
Yep.
Favorite of the series so far, since this is an official member of the lineup.
True.
Still Roger Ackroyd.
Yeah, I honestly can't remember if I've changed my favorite from Roger Ackroyd. So that's what we're going with, because that's what I thought of when I said favorite. I can't remember if I said Blue Train I liked more. I don't think I did. But Roger Ackroyd is still, when I think about a book I would reread again, it's Roger Ackroyd.
You said you liked The Big Four more than Roger Ackroyd.
But I had to go back and listen to that episode because I said I liked it. But what put Roger Ackroyd ahead of it is that I would reread it and I wouldn't reread The Big Four.
Yeah.
So it remains Roger Ackroyd. I guess we will see if I've said The Mystery of the Blue Train at any point. Yay for a terrible memory. Can't even...
But... have you read this book? How do you like your coffee? Do you have any book recommendations for us? Tell us all about it in the comments below. If you like the video, hit like. And if you're enjoying yourself, hit subscribe for more. Thank you for exploring black coffee with us. Join us next time when we'll be exploring Shatter City by Scott Westerfeld. I'm Sam Reiner.
And I'm Hannah Rossell.
And we hope to see you and a friend here next time. Escape With Me Book Club is a Lunar Skulk production. Check us out on TikTok or Instagram to keep up to date with us. Lunar_SKULK.